Hello and welcome to episode 262 of the Epic Film Challenge to 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die from 1999, American Beauty, directed by Sam Mendes. I have so much to say about this film, I don't even know where to start. I think the preamble is probably best suited to the elephant in the room, which is Kevin Spacey. There he is, I've mentioned it. This whole series, it seems particularly this series, the Epic Film Challenge to 1000 Movies You Must See Before You Die, has drawn controversy from people who watch my videos in this series. Even weekly, I seem to get comments from people who really don't agree with things that I say in these videos, and they particularly point to things where I'm talking about sensitive issues, perhaps. The Quiet Man was a film that I talked about and mentioned how I didn't really like the scenes in which John Wayne was essentially forcing himself on Maureen O'Hara until she relented. And I've got all kinds of comments like, oh, look at this SJW guy, and, strong-willed women like that kind of thing. And then there's the Woody Allen stuff where I talk about how I can't separate completely Woody Allen when he's in a movie tonguing a young girl who's about 17, 18 years old, and people are saying that it's you need to separate the art from the artist. People are annoyed that I talk about animal cruelty in films and how I don't like it. So I guess people are just big advocates for animals being hurt in films because it's realistic, and I'm just being an SJW for some reason. And I'm sure I'll get similar comments for this video, but I can only call it as I see it. And so with American Beauty, as I would say probably any Kevin Spacey film from now on, I'm going to have to view it through that lens of the allegations against him, which seem fairly strong and not conclusive, I suppose, but to a point. I've read a lot of the statements from people, particularly the one from Richard Dreyfuss's son, which was really disturbing to me, and just it was less about the sexual invasion, but more the power play from Kevin Spacey. And again, I don't like getting into these real life issues, but I have to mention it because for me, with American Beauty, you have a guy who is essentially acting as a predator, and it kind of just falls too closely in line with Kevin Spacey's alleged actions in real life to make it a little bit uncomfortable. But I can say that I mean, when it comes to separating the art from the artist, you have Roman Polanski, who was, who raped an underage girl and then fled the country, America, and then continued to make films. And there are people who love his films because he makes great films. And there are people, let's say, the recent French Film Awards ceremony, who walked out of the room when he won an award for Best Director. So you have the people who oppose it, you have the people who don't care about it, you have the people in the middle. I'm fairly in the middle. I can kind of look at a film like Carnage, a Roman Polanski film from I think 2012, and think that's a great film with some great performances from some great actors. I can enjoy it, but at the same time, in the back of my head, it's like, it's a little bit grim that he was behind this. So I can enjoy it, but I can't fully separate it. I can kind of temporarily separate it, kind of just like bridge the gap a little bit, and then just, okay, I can enjoy this. And then the film ends and it kind of slides back together. And I'm like, oh, that's a bit, I don't know how I feel, So that happens. But with Kevin Spacey, considering the things that have been alleged against him, American Beauty to me just is a film that hasn't aged very well in that regard. But I can also say, revisiting this film, I don't think it's aged that well in general. Big breath. I know I have friends who love this movie, and I'm going to give you some backstory here. I first saw this film maybe a few years after it came out in the early 2000s, and I loved it. Now, I was a teenager. I thought this was a great film. I loved the liberation of Kevin Spacey's character, Lester, who is this middle-aged advertising executive, and he has this fairly boring job. I mean, look at the place that he works, it's all grey and drab, and he's the typical American businessman living in the suburbs with a family, wife and a kid, and it just feels like a loveless, joyless existence up to a certain point. And the liberation that he goes through throughout the film, when he begins to essentially rebel against everything in terms of quitting his job, kind of defying his wife in certain instances. I loved that. I was so like, I felt like I was him. Even though I was a teenager, I kind of got wrapped up in the journey, and I was just like, yeah, this is awesome. Like, he's like, fuck you, fuck everything. It was like great, really enjoyable. And then some of the other things with the daughter Jane, played by Thora Birch, and Ricky, who she kind of becomes involved with. I really was gravitating towards that stuff. But also, as a young teenager, I'm looking at Mena Suvari, who is the high school girl who's the friend of Jane. So Kevin Spacey's character, Lester, his daughter Jane, has a friend in school who is played by Mena Suvari, and Lester becomes infatuated with her. And for me, it was very easy to see why when I was a teenager, and I was like very like, oh, so it was, I could completely go along with that aspect of it as well. And there's a kind of titillating aspect to that as well, the famous shot of her lying naked with the rose petals falling down, and then his consistent fantasies about her, and then we lead to their interactions throughout the film. And they're kind of flirting, and some of that stuff's really awkward when he's hanging around to keep talking with her, and his daughter's like, Dad, can we just, like, this is so embarrassing. And it really is. It's like, you just kind of, it's hard to watch at times, but as a teenager, I could fully go along with that. Now, this may come out really badly, but looking at Mena Suvari now, I don't see, it's so funny because as a teenager watching it, she was older than me, and it's kind of like, I don't know, the older kind of, but still youngish. I don't know, there was an appeal to her, and she seemed so adult, and kind of, that's part of what her character is projecting throughout the film, where she, is pretending like she has had all these sexual encounters and stuff, and so you get kind of impressed by that, or I did, when I was a teenager. But now looking at it, I completely see through the facade, and feel very little to no attraction to this character, both in the terms that obviously she's a lot younger than I am now, but also just purely from I can see the facade, and I think that's actually quite brilliant, but it's really sad and uncomfortable at the same time. But also now I'm viewing it as this 40-year-old guy having this, this sexual fantasy and fixation on a teenage girl the same age as his daughter, and the whole sphere of it being so very wrong is something I'm so much more like uncomfortably aware of now as an adult, and that is taking all of Kevin Spacey stuff in real life off the table. Just in general, it's kind of a weird, creepy vibe. But this film was hugely successful when it came out. It won a bunch of Academy Awards, I believe. In fact, I should maybe get the Wikipedia up and see for sure, because this film really did great when it came out. It should say here somewhere. It doesn't actually say that it did win any Academy Award. You think it? Well, I'm sure that I read somewhere that this had won quite a few awards, accolades. Let's see, American Beauty. Why am I not seeing that? I could have sworn that it was nominated for 8 Academy Awards. It won 5. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Cinematography, and Best Actor for Kevin Spacey. Wow. Okay, it was a big film. It got a lot of acclaim at the time, and people look at it a little bit differently now. I think perhaps because of the whole Kevin Spacey thing. I've seen interviews with Thora Birch and Mena Suvari where they seem a bit uncomfortable with it, to the point where they're really proud of the film. And a lot of people worked hard on that film, and they now feel like it's been taken away from them because of what Kevin Spacey has allegedly done. And so it's kind of like, it's one of those weird situations. But anyway, very successful film. When it came out, everyone was talking about it. It was one of the big films of 1999, and that was a year with a lot of great films, and American Beauty stands along all of those great films. And I can say that it didn't hold up for me. It really didn't. And I still think it's a great film. That's the interesting thing. And you've got to kind of recognize that even if you don't particularly love a film, it doesn't mean that it's not a good film. I think this is a very good film, if not a great film. I think some of the writing is brilliant. I think that the way that the music works in the film is wonderful. The melancholy to some of this film is really like exquisite. Like the word exquisite kind of popped into my head, and I thought, oh, that's a really wanky thing to say, but I do think that it is. There's some really great stuff going on here. and there's touches of, you know, the underbelly of suburbia, kind of the picket fences and everything, and then you look at what's behind closed doors, and you have a very, in terms of Lester and his wife, played by Annette Bening, a very you know, vacant and distant and troubled marriage. And then you have the new neighbors who move in with Ricky, whose father has a lot of issues, and his mother's like basically catatonic. So, you know, you kind of juxtapose the perfect American suburbia with just the problems that are lurking underneath everything. If you just peek past the hedges, or in what David Lynch would show in Blue Velvet, just go down beneath the grass and you see all the dirt underneath. There's definitely a lot of that. And the idea of finding beauty in things that don't immediately seem beautiful. This is another interesting element where Jane, Thora Birch's character, is kind of hooking up with Ricky, her new neighbor, and she, you know, they eventually become an item, and they're kind of in his bedroom looking at all the things. He films things constantly, and he says, "Do you want to watch my favorite video, my favorite thing that I filmed?" And it's a plastic bag just flying around in the wind, and he says that he filmed it for like 15 minutes, and, you know, the music is playing over the top, and I think he says like it's the most beautiful thing he's ever seen. He's getting emotional about it. And the weird thing about that scene to me is that I kind of relate to it. I feel like that's something I would look at and go, wow, there's something really beautiful about that, but not to the point of getting so like emotionally moved by it. I mean, there's a really creepy element to his character too, but you also understand how disturbed he is by the parents that he has, the oppression of his father, again, the distance and the vacancy of his mother. You know, that's definitely not a good combination. And you can only imagine the horrors that this kid has gone through between his parents, and there's a lot of backstory there that's hinted at, and I think hinted at very well throughout the film and his story. But, you know, I could relate to certain things of like, I don't know, I do look at certain kind of nondescript things and just think, oh, there's something, I love that image. Like, I'll just be out and about and just see something and go, there's something, I wish I could just take a picture of the way this looks now. Like, that's actually really cool, there's something interesting about it, just the way that the objects move together, I don't know. So I could relate to that. But then what I can't relate to is how deeply he is fixated on these things, the obsession that he kind of gets over these images. So, you know, it kind of goes up and down. And I feel like for me, a lot of this film is an up and down seesaw. You know, it really is, because you have Annette Bening, who for some reason, I mean, she's a great actress, but her performance is all over the place for me. And usually when it comes to what I think of a performance in a film, I'm usually fairly cut and dry. Like, it wasn't really good, it was really good. She toes the line of overdoing it and doing great acting. But she also dips over that line a few times throughout the film. There are moments where I think, oh wow, this is really good. And then she just overdoes it a little bit, and I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm watching someone act. You know, I'm not seeing a character feel something. But then there are moments where she's great, and I'm just like, oh, that was a great scene, you know. So it goes back and forth with her, and it's kind of unfortunate for me in the way I perceive it. Then you have Kevin Spacey, who I honestly didn't think was that great. He's really good, and there are moments where, you know, he certainly conveys the liberation and the journey of his character, where he goes through kind of a regression, actually, where, now that I think about it, I mean, obviously he has a fixation, an inappropriate one, on a teenage girl, but, you know, he quits his job, but then, you know, he goes to work at a fast food place. It's kind of a regression to a job a teenager would have. He starts smoking joints with Ricky, you know, so there's a certain element of his character that's kind of retracing his steps and finding his younger self. And there is this very distinct journey. I think in the beginning of the film, it kind of foreshadows the ending of the film, and he narrates throughout in certain sections. But yeah, there are just certain points. I mean, he's entertaining in the film when he is kind of just giving zero fucks and kind of going about his business and everything. But I don't know, it's really tricky. It's really tricky. I think Thora Birch is really good. She portrays that kind of teenage angst kind of perfectly, actually. In fact, I would say she gives a really consistent and very, very good performance. Is it Wes Bentley who plays Ricky? I really liked him, actually. There's a kind of like a rawness to his performance. Like, I really kind of buy his character, but it's a little bit scratchy at the same time, which feels appropriate to the character. I'd forgotten the arc that Ricky's dad takes. You know, I mean, for most of the film, he's very much a one-note kind of like, you know, oppressive father figure, and then there's a real twist at the end that I completely forgotten about. And I was like, oh my God. And that whole scene when he comes in through, if you've seen the film, when he comes in through the garage door in the rain, and the way everything is built up, it's a really great scene, and it kind of explains so much, and it's kind of, and it, in a way it becomes a, I don't know if I should mention this and have the spoiler section, but I'm assuming if you've watched this far, you've probably seen the film, but I'll leave it till the end. Anyway, there is this, well, I guess this is kind of a spoiler too, but towards the end, when Mena Suvari's character, Angela, I think, you know, she's kind of been toying with the flirtations of Lester, and towards the end of the film, she kind of is alone with him, and I don't know, oh God, how do I even go into this? It's strange because the beginning of their scene together at the end of the film, I love the lighting, and it looks beautiful. And there's almost a kind of, it's almost tastefully done at the beginning when they're about to start kissing, and it's like, I don't know, but then, it's strange. I feel so up and down about it, but then the sequence when she lies down on the sofa and takes her top off, and she just seems so vulnerable in that situation, and then you learn that she had none of these sexual experiences, because as he's literally bearing down on her, she says, "This is my first time." And in a way, it's such an uncomfortable moment that is just grim to watch. But it is such a brilliant piece of storytelling for this story. I mean, you know, like it or not, it just flips everything. And so, but I couldn't, I mean, it literally is a shot of him bearing down on her. He looks like such a predator. Like he is like literally towering over, like kind of almost just like crawling over her kind of semi-naked body, and then she's like, "This is my first time," and the buzz is gone. He is completely uninterested as soon as he finds out that she's a virgin, basically. And I guess he views her more as a daughter than a sexual object, and then he kind of wraps her up and kind of, it feels like it's a cheap kind of, get out of jail for free card. You know, he's about to kind of literally sleep with someone who is like a teenager, as a like 40-ish-year-old man. But then, you know, he doesn't do it, and he wraps her up, and he kind of takes care of her and stuff. It's all okay in the end, and I don't know if I quite buy into that. There's something really uncomfortable about it, and again, I can't remove completely the real life similarities and parallels that are going on in that sequence in particular. But yeah, just in general, the whole fixation on her. I mean, I don't think it's a story that shouldn't be told. I believe that all kinds of darkness in the human psyche and the choices that people make should be explored in films. But it's just an uncomfortable one to me, you know. And it would be the same if it wasn't someone like Kevin Spacey. It just it's a weird one, you know. And another film I can point to is Lolita, which may or may not be in the book. But that's a film that it's a kind of a light kind of comedy from what I remember. There's like Peter Sellers in there, and kind of, you know, there's a lot of fun to be had in Lolita, but I can't not be really grossed out by that film. I mean, the age difference in that one is ridiculous compared to, at least American Beauty. It's like almost, yeah, I think Mena Suvari was like 19, 20 when she made the film, but it's very much projected as like a schoolgirl or like high school girl kind of thing, same age as his daughter. So yeah, I'm sure I'll get a lot of shit for this video, people saying I'm fixating on it too much, the same way that he's probably fixating on her a bit too much, but it's the way I read it. It's not me trying to be like, aren't I progressive, or you know, aren't I kind of I say the right things and everything, and you know, I know what's right and wrong. No, it's just the way I view it. You know, it's just it's uncomfortable, and I don't fully buy into it. But it is a brilliantly made film, and the dialogue is great. The characters are really interesting, and I do, to some extent, still enjoy the liberation of a character who has been so crushed down by adult life, and the interactions with his wife, and the dinner scenes with Kevin Spacey, Annette Bening, and Thora Birch are really just. It's a really watchable film. There's just every scene is really, really good. There were just patchy bits with some of the acting at times, I felt, and overall I just feel a little bit uneasy with a lot of the things that are going on. The end felt a bit hollow to me, the very final kind of scene, the ending narration where he's talking about, you know, the beauty in life and everything, and I just don't know if I left the film watching it again for this series as the credits rolled thinking, Like the music's playing and I'm remembering all the great parts of the film. I'm thinking, man, that was a great film, but his words are echoing in my head and I just don't buy them. You know, it doesn't feel like the resolution that it clearly is trying to project for his character, which is this kind of arc in which he liberates himself, and then no matter what happens at the end of the film, he kind of completes this arc of kind of finding himself again and finding some peace within his life. And I don't know if I buy it, you know. But it was interesting, you know, to that degree. Is it a film you should see before you die? Absolutely. I think it's a great film from the 90s. If you can get past the Kevin Spacey thing, which I think most people can. Again, like I said, for me, with the separating the art and the artist, it is... I'm in the middle, you know. I can still watch films and enjoy them, but I can't fully embrace them. This isn't a film I go out and buy and put on the shelf proudly because of that, and that's a shame, you know. Maybe I would buy it someday, I don't know, but... It isn't a film I'd feel like rushing to rewatch again and again. It was on Sky, so I was able to kind of download it and watch it, which is really handy for me because it isn't a film I'd feel like buying because I don't know, and that's a real shame to everyone who worked on the film, and that's always the case when someone is in a movie and they've done something fairly bad or have done something that is alleged to have been very bad, and that could be a very tricky minefield when it comes to these things that come out in Hollywood. But I remember when I was like, you know, probably like not even a teenager, like hearing things about Kevin Spacey even then that seemed very weird and sexually inappropriate. I kind of think there was like a talk show where it was kind of a joke was made about it and that he was seen as doing something in London or something. I don't know. So that I just always had that weird feeling about him anyway. But it's a hard thing to balance, you know. And if you love his films, you think he's a great actor, and you can enjoy his performances regardless, all the power to you. I don't think that's really hurting anyone because you're not ultimately supporting what he has done, allegedly, in real life. But yeah, I don't know why I was laughing then. It's just I keep feeling the need to preface all of these comments with allegedly because it is what it is. But yeah, but to me, it is kind of a, you know, again, like the film, it's a bit of a seesaw. I can't fully embrace it, but I don't fully reject it either. But it isn't a film I go back to again and again, and I do think that some elements of it don't quite hold up for me in terms of some of the acting, and also I just think the overall journey of him rings a little hollow to me. Maybe that's the point, I don't know. You know, there's a certain irony to that final kind of moment where Ricky is looking into the eyes of a certain character at the very end, and perhaps seeing, you know, the beauty that in something that doesn't immediately seem beautiful. But again, that feels a little bit, you know, devoid of weight. I don't know. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed revisiting it. I definitely felt like it wasn't as good as I remembered it. And but I do think it's a film you should see before you die. I think it's a signature film from the 90s. And if you are into films, and there's a lot of great, again, the cinematography, the way I love the way music is used in the film. It's really evocative, and melancholia is a vibe that comes throughout in the middle of the film. I think it's specifically the scene with the plastic bag floating around, the music that played. I don't know if that's like a piece of music that existed before, or if it was composed for this film, but I feel like that piece of music was used a lot, or I don't know. It just hearing that piece of music, excuse me, the piano piece. It takes me right back to the late 90s and the early 2000s. So I feel like maybe it originated in the film and was then used in maybe parodies or something. But it definitely was parodied, that plastic bag scene. But that piece of music is just beautiful, and there's just such a bittersweet edge to it. But yeah, and it's a funny film at time too. There's some great humor in it. You know, Buddy Kane. You know, Peter Gallagher. Is it Peter Gallagher who plays Buddy Kane? You know, that whole kind of part of the story was kind of amusing to me, perhaps in some wrong ways. But yeah. Oh, Chris Cooper is the actor who played Ricky's father. I think he did a really great job. I did not realize it was Allison Janney who plays Ricky's mother in a very small but I think very affecting performance as the kind of catatonic mother to Ricky. But yeah, there's just a lot of great things going on in the film, and I know people love it, but to me it didn't quite reach the heights of what I remembered, if that makes any sense. But I do think it's a film you should see before you die, and I will briefly get into some spoiler talk here before we end. So I'm pretty sure at the beginning he kind of prefaces the whole story as like I'm going to die in a few days or something to that effect. So, and I'd forgotten about that kind of throughout most of the film, and so by the time we get to the end, I was like, Oh yeah, I was starting to remember there's a scene where his head gets blown up. You know, I started to kind of get, oh yeah, I'm seeing a wall and blood splattering across it. So then I was waiting for it. This is actually something I really enjoyed because I'd forgotten when it was coming. So after the scene when he was about to have sex with Angela, and then, you know, he kind of wraps her up in a jacket or whatever it is, and he brings her into the kitchen, and he's kind of sitting there chatting with her and stuff, and they're kind of talking it through. And I did quite like that scene, actually. Again, it's seesaw. It's a real seesaw for me, this movie. But I was thinking, like, is it going to happen now? So I was getting really tense throughout that last, you know, kind of 10, 15 minutes of the film, because I didn't know when it was going to happen. It wasn't until he sat down, kind of, I think, with a beer, and kind of is very, you know, he dies with a smile on his face, looking at, I think, a photo of his family. So the tension for that was like, oh my God. And they kind of build it up to be like a who's going to do it kind of, you know, third act of the film. Who's going to kill him? And you kind of know who's going to do it. It's kind of quite obvious. But again, just his voiceover at the end after he's died, and it's kind of like a whimsical, I mean, the kind of camera panning over the trees, and we're kind of ending how we began, and he's kind of all like, you know, at peace with the fact that he died, and, you know, there's beauty and everything. I don't know. It just didn't, I don't know, it just felt a bit weightless to me, and it just was a bit underwhelming. But again, perhaps maybe that was the point. Anyway, leave your thoughts down below. Be kind. You know, I get more wary about talking about these kind of things, but, you know, this whole series for me isn't about giving you a great analysis of the movie. It's just telling you what I thought of it. And often that is going to include outside factors that completely colour my viewing of the story. And that's what this series is about, is documenting some of those things. So for me, that was a big part of it. You know, I couldn't avoid it in my head, specifically because of the things that happen in the story. But I was still able to enjoy it on some level. And just in general, regardless of all the outside stuff, I did think it didn't quite hold up as well as it used to. But it's still a great film. Thank you for watching. I'll see you mercifully in the next one.